and I testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is his final prophet and messenger. So alhamdulillah that we have finished the chapter of purification, or the book of purification, as is mentioned in the explanation of the Matan of Abi Shujā, published by Toiba Books. And now we are starting with the chapter of the prayer. Page 123. Once again, the format that we use is above the line. We read that first, that's the text, and then we commence with the explanation. And then certain footnotes, we do read them for the benefit. Some other footnotes, we leave them out because it's too much detail at this point, and we'll get back to it inshallah when we study a book that is for the higher levels. So the author said, the prayer times. The obligatory prayers are 5. The Dhuhr prayer, and the beginning of its time is when the sun has declined westward from the middle of the sky, and its end is when the shadow of everything is similar in length to that of the object itself, in addition to its zenithal shadow. And the Asr prayer, and the beginning of its time is by the addition to the shadow of similarity, and the end of its choice time is when the shadow becomes twice as long as the object, and the end of its permissible time is when the sun sets. And the Maghrib prayer, and it only has one time, which is from the sunset, and for the duration needed to call the adhan, make wudu, cover the nakedness, make the iqamah, and pray 5 cycles, rak'ahs. And the Isha prayer, the beginning of its time is by the disappearance of the red twilight, and the end of its choice time is until the first third of the night, and the end of its permissible time is the rising of the second dawn. And the Subh prayer, and the beginning of its time is the rising of the second dawn, and the end of its choice time is by the spreading of the light, and the end of its permissible time is sunrise. So this gives you a feel of how the scholars of the Islamic law, and particularly in this book, Abu Shujā, how he followed the request of his friend that told him that he wanted a lot of lists, and that he wanted things to be mentioned with like a bullet point type of format. So now we're going on to the explanation of that matan, that text that we read. 124, page 124, the author said, linguistically, the Arabic term as-salah means to make a supplication for a good thing. So footnote 193. The prayers became obligatory during the night journey, al-Isra, prior to the migration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yani prior to the Hijrah. The first of the 5 prayers prayed by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the Dhuhr prayer. That is why it was called Dhuhr, because it was the first one that Zahirat, the first one that appeared. So this is some good detail. The night journey, as you know, is Al-Isra al-Mi'raj, the night journey and the ascension, and this happened before the migration, before the Hijrah, before the Muslims were ordered by Allah to leave Mecca and to migrate to Al-Madinah. So the author said, linguistically, the term as-salah, yani in the Arabic language, if you look in the Arabic dictionary and you look up the word salah, the definition you're going to find is to make a supplication for a good thing. So to ask, to make supplication for a good thing, and to ask for a good thing, to make supplication for a good thing. So this term, originally in the Arabic language, salah, is a supplication asking for something good. Now religiously, yani in terms of the Islamic context and how this term that originally exists in the Arabic language with the meaning of making supplication for a good thing, it is defined as the author said, religiously, as-salah is defined by a series of sayings and actions that start with saying Allahu Akbar, the takbir, and end most of the time with saying Assalamu alaikum, the terms of the taslim. So in the Islamic context, yani when speaking Islamically, and just the word as-salah is used, What's meant by it is these specific actions and sayings, which begin with the takbirah, with saying Allahu Akbar, and they end with Assalamu Alaikum. The author said the obligatory prayers are 5, and it is known by necessity among the Muslims that these 5 prayers are obligatory prayers. The laymen and the scholars alike know that these are obligatory prayers. So if anyone denies the obligation of any one of them, he becomes a blasphemer. If anyone claims that any of them is not an obligation, he blasphemes by that. These 5 prayers are obligatory prayers on the accountable person to pray them each day and night. This is so because Ahmad and others narrated from the Prophet ﷺ that he said what means there are 5 prayers which Allah made obligatory upon the slaves. The one who fulfills them, Allah will admit him to paradise, that is without torture, and the one who does not pray them, that is who does not pray all of them, it would not be guaranteed for him to enter paradise. Either Allah forgives him and admits him to paradise, or Allah tortures him. And what it means in the case of the Muslim, if he does not pray some of the prayers, then he doesn't have that guarantee, that promise of entering paradise without previous torture. It means that because of the sins that he committed, it's possible that he would be punished for them, and it's possible that he'll be forgiven and not punished for them, and then he'll enter paradise without previous torture. But if he is punished, of course, as you know, as is the case with the Muslim, he would be eventually taken out of hellfire, and he'll enter paradise. The author said, also there's a hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari that a Bedouin asked the Prophet ﷺ how many prayers he is obligated to pray each day and night. And the Prophet ﷺ replied that they are 5. That Bedouin asked the Prophet ﷺ, am I obligated to pray any other prayers? The Prophet ﷺ said no. These 2 hadith, among others, are proof that there are only 5 obligatory prayers every day and night upon each accountable person. So in terms of what is called fard, the Arabic term fard, which is defined in different ways by different imams, but they are all in agreement that there are only 5 fard prayers. Each one of the prayers becomes an obligation upon the accountable Muslim by the beginning of its time. So let's footnote 194. The best time to pray the 5 obligatory prayers is at the beginning of the prayer time, called in Arabic waqtul fadila. This is the best time and most rewardable. So as we're going to discuss, the prayer times, they are a window of time by which the Muslim, he has that time to comply with the order of Allah. So Allah Ta'ala made it or facilitated for the Muslim and gave him this window of time so that the Muslim, he could comply with what Allah Ta'ala ordered. However, the best thing to do in order to get the maximum reward that you possibly can for the prayer, the Muslim, he should immediately after he's sure the prayer time is in, he should perform the prayer. So this is called in Arabic waqtul fadila, and it is the prime time to pray the prayer, and as soon as it comes in. The author said, so when its time begins, it becomes an obligation on the accountable person to pray. It is not an obligation to pray the Isha until the Isha time starts. So if the person dies before that, one is not sinful for not praying it. This does not mean that one is obligated to pray the prayer at the beginning of the time, and that if one delays it and prays it a little bit after, or prays it before the end of its time, that one is sinful. Rather, it is permissible for one to delay the prayer in a way that one can perform it within its time. So that's another important case to know, which is that window of time that we have. It means that once the prayer time is in, now the judgment and it applies to the accountable person. And now the prayer time is in. Now this order of having to pray within this window of time now is upon him. Yani now it applies to him. However, he doesn't have to immediately jump up and pray, or else he would be sinful. No, because that's the point of the window of time, is the person can pray it as soon as he's sure, or he can pray it 10 minutes after, 15 minutes after, an hour later, as long as he prays it before the time is over. Yani what's called within its time, before the end of its time. So now we're going to read footnote 195. If one began one's prayer while there was enough time to pray the minimum that one has to do within the prayer time, one can extend one's prayer beyond the prayer time. It was narrated that Abu Bakr began his prayer during the Fajr time and extended it beyond sunrise. When asked by the followers, he said that it is not an issue even if the sun rose. So this is another rule, which is, as long as the Muslim enters into the prayer with enough time left in the prayer time to pray the minimum amount of the prayer, then it's considered that he's not sinful and that his prayer would be counted as on time. So let's say it takes the person, if you were only to pray the minimum, let's say 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes, just as an example. If in order to do the minimum amount of the prayer, yani just the integrals, it would take someone 5 minutes. So let's say 6 minutes before the prayer time is out, he started the prayer. It's counted that he's not sinful, and it's counted that the prayer is done on time. Even if he does not finish, let's say, even if he does not finish within those 5 minutes, within those 6 minutes. Shani Bani, Ismail, stay here, Habibi. Let me turn on this camera. I don't know, the thing is, I don't know if there's anyone on there that's constantly watching. I just put that on. So if someone started the prayer before, 5 minutes before the prayer time ended, that's enough time for them to do the minimum amount of the prayer. And let's say they kept praying beyond the 5 minutes, the prayer time ended, and so he took 10 minutes to pray. It's still considered that the prayer is on time and it is not sinful, as is shown by the action of Abu Bakr in that footnote that we mentioned. Then footnote 196, if one is able to pray at least 1 rak'ah before the time of the prayer ends, the prayer is considered as ada, yani on time, meaning it is not considered as a makeup. However, if one does not complete 1 rak'ah within the prayer time, then his prayer is considered a makeup. So this is talking in terms of whether it's considered a makeup prayer or an on-time prayer. If he does not at least finish 1 rak'ah within the prayer time, then it's considered a makeup. Now here there's an extra detail, which is if the person delayed the prayer without an excuse, to an extent that he would not be able to complete the prayer the time that is left, just the minimum amount, then he's considered sinful. He's sinful for that, if he delayed it without an excuse. Now in the case where, let's say he forgot about the prayer, and then he remembered with only a short time left, and he started the prayer, and it was not enough time for him to do 1 rak'ah, then in that case, what happens? In that case, it's considered to be makeup and not on time. But he's not sinful because he didn't delay the prayer without an excuse. He had forgotten about the prayer, and as soon as he remembered, he started to pray. Then the author said, for example, if at the beginning of the Dhuhr prayer, one does not pray immediately, but delays it a little bit until the middle of its time, and then prays it such that one prays Dhuhr before the Asr is in. That is, one has enough time to finish it before the Asr is in. One is not sinful for that. So if one delayed praying the Dhuhr prayer, for example, and then he died, and he had the intention to perform all of it before its time was out, but he did not pray immediately, he thought he would pray it after a period of time, he had the firm intention to pray it within its time, but this person died, he is not sinful, because he had the firm intention to pray it in time, and there was still enough time to pray it before its time ended. If in this matter there is a difference between the obligatory prayer and the obligatory Hajj pilgrimage. If someone was able to go to Hajj and he did not go, he delayed going to Hajj until the next year without an excuse, despite being able to go this year, but then before going the next year he died, at that moment a sin is written on him. It is sinful to delay Hajj until death without performing it while one was able to perform it. This is different than the prayer. If one delays the prayer while one has the firm intention to perform it within its time, but then one dies while there is still enough time to perform it, then one is not sinful for that, because its time was not out yet. But the matter with Hajj is different. That is, even if one is firm that one wants to go to Hajj the next year, and one delayed going to Hajj this year without an excuse, while one was able to go, and one dies before going to Hajj the next year, then one is sinful for that. So this case is also a habit of the scholars of the Islamic law. When they mention a case that has a similar parameter, similar circumstances in another chapter, and in another category of the obligatory acts. For example, like in this case between the prayer and the Hajj. And there's a few of these between the prayer and the Hajj, actually. So basically, the original case is that during the Hajj, once you are obligated to go, and you fulfill all the conditions and you are considered to be someone who is able, and the Hajj becomes an obligation upon you, then you have the choice to go that same year in which you're able, and you have the choice to delay it until the next year. Because basically, in order for someone to be able to go to the Hajj, that means that all the logistics of the Hajj, he's able. So he's got the money, he has the time, and he's able to go and come back and not harm his family, etc. And all the checklist is fulfilled. But still, even though that's the case, Islamically, he's not obligated to go that same year. He can wait until the next year. But if he does wait until the next year, and in between that, he dies, then at the moment that he dies, he gets written an enormous sin. So he gets an enormous sin by that. And that's different than the case of the prayer. So that's what the author is highlighting, is saying that for us, when the prayer time comes in, now this obligation, this commandment, it applies to us. It doesn't apply to us before the prayer time starts, because the prayer time hasn't started. So how could you fulfill a command that hasn't come yet, or that its time hasn't started yet? So for the prayer, once the prayer time comes in, now the person, this obligation applies to him. But again, he has a window of time, so it's not incumbent upon him to get up immediately and start to pray. He can delay the prayer for some time. He can choose to pray 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, half an hour later, an hour later, as long as he intends to do the complete prayer before the time is over. So while that time is occurring, and while he's delaying it, let's say within that half hour, within that hour, he happens to die. And there's still, let's say, an hour left or half an hour left of the prayer time. Because he had the intention to fulfill the prayer completely before the time was over, he's not sinful. So this is the difference between the prayer and between the Hajj. It's one of those instances that the scholars of the Islamic law, they highlight to tell the difference.
So when the prayer time comes in, the person should make, I mean, he pretty much does, he's like, oh, I need to pray. Or does he need to make a specific intention on going to fulfill the prayer? Because I always understood that if you miss that prayer, then you're wrong with prayer.
Yeah, if you miss it.
So,
Not by death, though.
You already know miss it because of death.
No.
Oh.
But there is some detail, some of them mentioned to have like the firm intention
So,
to do the prayer.
the person should say, I'm going to pray.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once he knows the prayer time is in, because then basically what's he doing? He's making a decision. Once he knows it's in, now he's either going to say, okay, I'm going to go pray now because I know it's in, or he's going to say, I'm going to pray it later. But then that means he has the intention that I intend to pray it later. So it kind of happens naturally.
Yeah, it does. So that's enough to be like,
That's
I
enough.
need to pray.
Yeah. Then the author said, as for the witr prayer, it is not an obligation according to the Shafi'i school. According to the Hanafi school, it is wajib. Both fard and wajib in the Hanafi school are matters that if one does not perform, one is sinful. But they consider the religious proof for what they say is fard to be stronger. This is why they differentiate about some matters in which they say this is fard, and matters they say this is wajib. It does not mean that what they call as wajib, they consider leaving it out as not sinful. No, they do say that leaving it out is a sin. However, they consider its proof not to be as strong as the proof of the fard. So it is better for the person to pray the witr prayer, because by that one would be in compliance with all the schools. If someone follows the Shafi'i school and he does not want to pray it, he is not sinful by that. But if he follows the Hanafi school, he has to pray it, otherwise he is sinful because he believes that it is wajib, that is, he has to do it. So kind of glad that the author mentioned it, because then it gives us an opportunity to explore this. I know for some it might be a new territory, but it is something that is very insightful and gives us an insight. It gives us an insight into the fundamentals and the way that these imams, how they deduce the judgments. So first we'll start with a Shafi'i. In the Shafi'i school, and his definition of something that is wajib is that he says the one who leaves it out is threatened with torture. So according to a Shafi'i, the wajib is whatever, if the person leaves it out, he's threatened with torture. So a Shafi'i, in the chapters of the Islamic law, the categories of the Islamic law, like the chapter of the purification, chapter of the prayer, the chapter of zakat, the chapter of fasting, the chapter of these chapters, all of them except for the Hajj. In the Shafi'i school, fard and wajib are the same. They're exactly the same. They're defined the same way. In the school of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, in the school of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, what they define as fard and what they define as wajib, they have a different definition. So basically, according to the Hanafi school, what they judge as fard is something that if the Muslim leaves it out, he is sinful. And that its evidence, the evidence of that thing, that if the Muslim leaves it out is sinful, is definite, what they call definite. Okay, that's another thing going into the fundamentals of the Hanafi school. And what they define as wajib is whatever, if a Muslim leaves it out, is sinful, but the evidence for it is not definite. So that's what the author meant by they consider that its evidence is not as strong. So in the Hanafi school, they say there's only 5 fard prayers, and that it's an obligation, and that the Muslim, if he doesn't do it, he's sinful. And its evidence is definitive evidence, qat'i. And what is wajib, what is wajib, they say it's not fard, but if the Muslim leaves it out, he's sinful, he gets a sin. And they say that about the witr prayer. So the Muslim who wants to be in compliance with all the schools, he prays the witr prayer so that he would not be judged as sinful according to the Hanafis. But if the Muslim wants to follow Imam al-Shafi'i, although he knows that the Hanafis, they say that, then this is perfectly fine. He's not sinful according to al-Shafi'i, and on Judgment Day he won't be asked, why didn't you follow Abu Hanifa, for example? Because this is a mercy for us, it's something for the Muslim nation. The author said, the beginning of the Dhuhr prayer is when the sun has declined westward from the middle of the sky, and its end is when the shadow of everything is similar in length to that of the object itself, in addition to its zenithal shadow. So footnote 197, very beneficial. The Dhuhr prayer has different times. Waqtul Fadila is the best time to pray the Dhuhr prayer, which is at the beginning of the Dhuhr time, prime time. This means from when the prayer time enters until one does what one needs to prepare for the prayer. Waqtul Ikhtiyar is the second tier, the second level, or the second category. And it means that you have a choice, or the time of the choice. It starts after Waqtul Fadila, the prime time, until the end of the Dhuhr time, while being able to pray the 4 rak'ahs during the Dhuhr time. Then after that is Waqtul Udhur, the time of an excuse. This is when one prays the Dhuhr during the Asr time, and one is combining the prayers, as the person can do that while traveling. And this has a benefit that is felt, that in certain judgments, certain rules, there's certain judgments, etc., that their results are based on, was this prayer done in its time? Is it still the time of the prayer? Like, for example, there's a basic one where anyone who's learned the obligatory knowledge, this case applies to that. A case where, I can't give too many clues or else I'll give it away. But where this, let's say, rule that the time of the excuse is related to the judgment. So basically, don't we say that in the Shafi'i school, if a woman, she finished her menstruation with enough time to say Allahu Akbar before the prayer ended, if the prayer was combinable, then she has to make up that one, that the time that she was in, and the one before it. So if there was only, let's say, 20 seconds left of Asr and her period stopped, so now she's obligated to do what? She's obligated to pray Asr, and she's obligated to pray Dhuhr. Because why? Because they're combinable. Because the Asr time is the extent, and at the end of the Asr time is the extent of the time of the udhur, the time of the excuse. Then there's waqtu darura, the time of necessity, is when the prohibitive matter terminates while there's enough time to say Allahu Akbar. Okay, that's for that. The waqt of the excuse, yani, is still related to that, but it's just categorized under when you're traveling, you can combine. So basically, you're excused for delaying dhuhr to asr because you're traveling, so it's a time of excuse. The time of the necessity, yani, is, for example, the only little bit of time that's left before its time ends and the person can say Allahu Akbar. And waqtu hurma is when one delays praying without an excuse until parts of the 4 rak'ah are prayed during the dhuhr time and the remaining occur after dhuhr time has ended, even if one managed to complete 1 or 2 rak'ahs within the prayer time. Because we mentioned just like some minutes ago that the person is allowed to delay praying the prayer within the prayer time until the point where it can only fit the minimum amount of the prayer. So if it takes him 5 minutes to pray dhuhr, then he has up until 5 minutes before dhuhr ends to start praying. If he, let's say, starts dhuhr 2 minutes before dhuhr ends, since it's not enough time for him, let's say if it takes him 5 minutes, it's not enough time for him to pray the minimum amount of dhuhr, then this is the time is called waqtul hurma, the prohibited time, or the time where the person, if they start the prayer during that time, they get a sin. If a person starts the prayer before, while there's enough time to do the minimum amount of the prayer, then he's safe from the sin. But if he starts the prayer with not enough time to perform the minimum amount of prayer within the time, he's sinful. And that time is called waqtul hurma. And then the author said, Abu Shujā started the 5 prayers by mentioning the dhuhr prayer because this was the first of the 5 prayers which the Prophet ﷺ prayed. During the night of Al-Mi'raj, Allah made it an obligation upon the Muslims to pray the 5 prayers. The next day, Angel Jibreel came down and he prayed next to Al-Kaaba the 5 prayers. He was the leader and the Prophet ﷺ was the follower. So he prayed with the Prophet ﷺ the 5 prayers, each prayer at the beginning of its time. The first one among these 5 was the dhuhr prayer. This is why the author chose to start with that prayer, because the Prophet ﷺ started with it. The dhuhr time starts for us as it appears for us. Footnote 199. This statement is here because in reality, the sun declines from its zenith before we see it declining from its zenith. So we go with where we see the sun and not where the sun actually is. Because in reality, it is ahead from where we see it. And it is a time delay, basically. Your perception of the sun, let's say, having declined westward from the zenith, takes place after the sun actually declined. The dhuhr time starts for us as it appears for us, meaning when the sun moves from its zenith to the western horizon. The sun rises from the east. It moves until it reaches the middle of the sky. At that time, the sun is at its zenith. When it moves a little bit towards the west, that is when we can notice that it moved a little bit to the west, this is when the dhuhr starts. What we consider as a little bit, truly, it is a big distance, because the sun is far away from us and it is very big. So what we see as a small distance, it is truly a big distance. But what we count on is what seems to us a little bit. Hence, when we notice that it moved a little bit, this is when the dhuhr time starts. One can know that by checking the shadow. Footnote number 200, also beneficial. The shade/shadow is not because of no sun. In paradise, there is shadow, but there is no sun. Allah creates the shadow to protect our bodies from the heat and other than that. Voice muffled. Okay, let me see here. Okay, how about now? Is it better now? طيب, so once the shadow moves towards the east, this means that the sun is moving towards the west. So one knows that the dhuhr time is in. Also, one can know that by another method. The sun rises from the east, and when it rises, the shadow is long. Then as the sun rises, the shadow gets shorter, until at one point the shadow does not become shorter anymore, because it reached the shortest length on that day. At that moment, the sun is at its zenith. Now once the shadow starts to become longer again, this is when the dhuhr time is in. So there are two methods here that are mentioned to know the beginning of the dhuhr prayer. So one of them is through the shadow, and one of them is just by observing with the eye that the sun has declined westward. Then the author said, once the shadow becomes equal to the length of the shadow of the object when the sun was at its zenith, in addition to the length of the object, this is when the time of dhuhr ends. And immediately after that, the time of asr starts. So there is no gap between the dhuhr and the asr. By the ending of dhuhr, asr begins. So if on a specific day an object measures 3 cubits in length, and when the sun was at its zenith, the shadow of it was 1 cubit. So when the shadow becomes 4 cubits in length, this is when the time of dhuhr ends, and immediately after that, the asr starts. The best time to pray the dhuhr, if one wants to get the maximum reward, is to pray it at the beginning of its time. This time is called waqtul fadila, prime time. If one delays praying the dhuhr until one still has enough time to pray it before its time is out, then it is permissible, it is not disliked. This is because Jibreel, on the first day after the night of Al-Mi'raj, when he prayed with the Prophet alayhi as-salatu was-salam, he prayed at the beginning of the time each prayer. And he prayed at the beginning of the time of each prayer. The next day, he prayed as Imam with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they prayed the dhuhr at the end of its time in a way that when they said Assalamu alaikum, Asr time came in. Jibreel did that so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would know the time one can pray the dhuhr without his prayer being disliked. If one delays the dhuhr without an excuse until there is not enough time to pray all of it within the dhuhr time, that is, a part of it is asr time, one is sinful for that. This is called waqtul hurma. Now if someone delays after praying the dhuhr, but he prayed 1 rak'ah within the dhuhr time, and after finishing this rak'ah, the asr time came in this case his prayer is considered ada. And that means on time. That is, it is not considered that he is making it up, because 1 rak'ah was prayed within its time. And this is sufficient, so the prayer would not be considered a make-up prayer. This is, as it was mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the one who prays 1 rak'ah of the prayer of Asr before the sun sets, that this prayer is not considered a make-up for him. Rather, it is considered as if he prayed it in time, yani within its time, yani meaning it's not counted as a make-up. However, one is sinful if one delays it on purpose until there is not enough time within the time of that prayer to perform it. Moreover, there is time for the dhuhr prayer, which is to delay the prayer with the intention to join it with the asr if the person is traveling. For example, so it seems like there's some typos here, and it seems like there might be a sentence that got deleted.
Can you explain those two scenarios?
One scenario is the person, they wait 1 minute before the time is out, which is obviously not enough for them to pray all 4 rak'ahs with the minimum obligation. So if he did that without an excuse, he's sinful. And if he was able to finish that one rak'ah in that 1 minute, the prayer is considered to be ada and not qada.
Ada meaning it's valid.
No, ada meaning that it's not a makeup. Yeah, it's valid.
But even if he catches the prayer before the prayer time goes out and all he says is Allahu Akbar, it's still valid, but he's sinful.
No, for just Allahu Akbar, then it would be considered a makeup prayer.
And that's only for Asr?
No, for any prayer. Yeah. If he was able to do at least one rak'ah within the time before it goes out, then it's considered adat, not makeup. And if he delayed it until that time, that he's only able to pray one rak'ah without an excuse, he's sinful. If he only says Allahu Akbar, then the prayer is not going to be considered, and if it's only enough time for him to say Allahu Akbar, then the prayer is not considered adat, it's considered qada. Yeah, still valid, yeah.
It's not like a makeup. It would be considered a makeup prayer, but he's praying it. So
Yes, exactly. That would be
he's
the
committing an enormous sin.
for delaying it to a time where he can't pray the whole prayer at minimum. Yes, but if he didn't do that, then he's not sinful. And if he didn't delay without an excuse,
Okay, so just in the first scenario, he caught it in time to pray the first rak'ah, and then the prayer time went out. It's considered valid, but he's still sinful.
if he did that without an excuse.
He did that without an excuse. And then in the second area, so one is like, they're both sinful, but one is more of a sin. Because the second scenario, it's considered qada, makeup, which is an enormous sin because he missed the prayer.
If it's with an excuse, then it's just considered qada without a sin.
We're just talking about no excuse in both.
Oh, no excuse, yeah. For no excuse, if he only prayed one rak'ah within the time, it's considered adat, not qada, and he's sinful. And if he didn't get to pray one rak'ah, it's considered qada, not adat, and he's sinful. Yeah, if he delayed it that long without an excuse. But sometimes a person will say, the prayer time comes in, and they tell themselves, I'm gonna pray like in 10 minutes. I'm gonna get up and pray. But then, like thing after thing after thing happened, and since they had, let's say, told themselves that in 10 minutes they're gonna pray, they felt, because that's their habit, right? They felt that they had already prayed, but because they were like going from thing to thing to thing to thing, they had already like thought that they prayed, but then like let's say 10 seconds before the prayer time went out, they realized they haven't prayed yet, so they say Allahu Akbar. They're not sinful, and the prayer is considered qada, because not even one rak'ah he made it in the time. And forgetting is another one. Yeah, it was the same thing. And he said to himself, as soon as the prayer time comes in 10 minutes, I'm going to pray, because that's their habit. But then they got distracted, and like they forgot. Then 10 seconds before the prayer ends, they remembered. They say right away, Allahu Akbar. They start the prayer. They're not sinful, and it's qada, because they didn't even do one rak'ah.
Forgetfulness is
An excuse, of course. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that my nation has been absolved from forgetting and like involuntary things.
But in this scenario, forgetfulness, there's a difference between forgetting and like delaying.
That's not forgetting. That's them delaying.
But that's how you explained it. Like, oh, I'm going to do it in 10 minutes.
No, they said as soon as the prayer time came in, they said, I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. So they had the intention to do it. But then they got distracted by doing one thing, another thing, another thing, another thing, to the point that they forgot. So they got distracted by whatever they were doing, and then 10 seconds before the prayer time is out, they remembered that they haven't prayed. So then they say Allahu Akbar, they're not sinful, and the prayer is qada, because they didn't get to pray one rak'ah within the time.
That's just forgetting.
Yes, that's forgetting, yeah. And,
That's an excuse.
yes. Yeah, forgetting is an excuse. No one can be blameworthy for forgetting. No matter like how big it is. Like, or how big whatever it is that they forgot. Because forgetting, you can't help it. It's not under control.
And in the, what was the story, on the second day, that, Angel Jibreel led the prayer, but he did it in the time where he passed the salam, when I don't wanna, because I don't wanna.
Yeah, it says as soon as he said Assalamu alaikum, the Asr time started.
And he did this to show the permissibility of it?
Yes, because the second day when he came, he didn't come at the same time as the first day. So the first day he came at the beginning of each time, right, to show the Prophet ﷺ how the prayer time begins, or yani, when the prayer time begins. And then the second day, he didn't come at that time. He waited. So for example, for the Dhuhr, he waited until there was enough time for them to pray, like the complete prayer. And then by the time he said, Assalamu alaikum, Asr time is in. Because the Prophet ﷺ the day before, he prayed with Angel Jibreel at the beginning of Asr time. So then the second day when he came and he prayed Dhuhr at that delayed time, when they said Assalamu alaikum, obviously the Prophet ﷺ can notice that Asr is in. Because he had observed the day before.
But it wasn't, it's not simple.
Absolutely not sinful. Because they did the whole prayer. That they entered into the prayer with enough time to pray the whole thing.
And he did that to show the permissibility of it, that it was still valid?
To show the extent of the Dhuhr time. How much time you have to pray Dhuhr. And he did the same with the others too. The other said, the prayer of Asr, and footnote 201, very beneficial. The Asr prayer has 7 times. Waqtul Fadila. And you can see this, notice this also with studying the Islamic law. Like for example, in the Dhuhr time, it gives you a breakdown of these times, except for the Dhuhr time is different. It only has the Waqtul Fadila, and Waqtul Khiyar, and then Waqtul Hurma, and Waqtul Darura. But it doesn't have Waqtul Al-Karaha. So for the Asr, it has 7 times. Waqtul Fadila, which is to pray it at the beginning of its time. Waqtul Ikhtiyar, which is after the time of Al-Fadila, until the length of the shadow is twice the length of the object. Waqtul Jawaz, permissible without karaha, without it being disliked, which is when the shadow is longer than twice the length of the object until the appearance of the yellowish light in the western horizon. Then there's Waqtul Jawaz with karaha, with being disliked, which is to delay performing the prayer without an excuse until the yellowish light appears and before sunset, while there is time to pray all 4 rak'ahs. So for the Asr prayer, it's got an extra time, other than the Dhuhr, which is that period of time between after the permissible time without dislikeness. So when that time ends, up until the time where it's not enough anymore to do the complete prayer at minimum, then that's called the permissible time with dislikeness. Then you have Waqtul Hurma, which is when one delays praying without an excuse until a part of the 4 rak'ahs is prayed during the Asr time and the remaining part after the Asr has ended. Waqtul Udhr, which is when one prays the Asr during the Dhuhr time, when one is combining prayers as one can do while traveling. And then there's Waqtul Darura, which is when the prohibitive matter terminates, while there is enough time to say Allahu Akbar. So just to show you, and this is, again, who's one of my professors that I first learned this book with, like sitting at a desk, taking notes, like in a classroom setting, was a very astute professor. And it's from taking that book that really the love of the knowledge of the Islamic law goes into your heart. But so, for example, one question on the test would be, state the 7 times of Asr. Name them and define them. Yani. So, you have to be very precise. And this shows you how precise the scholars of the Islamic law are. I wish that I had a visual. Maybe I'll make some sort of like visual graphic, because nowadays the people, they need that. They might even say that they can't learn unless they have that. So basically how this chart would be, you would have like let's say like a bar, and then for like the first, and color coded too. The first part of the bar, let's say it would be green, and it would be the prime time, waqtul fadila. So then that's one. And then when that ends, the second part, you would have waqtul khiyar, which is like the second best time, with a certain color. Then after that, waqtul jawaz, without dislikeness, another part of the bar. And then waqtul jawaz with dislikeness, another part of the bar. Then waqtul hurma, another part of the bar. And then waqtul darura and waqtul udhr. Well, waqtul udhr, let's say, would it be outside of the asr time? Because that just means you praying asr during dhuhr because of traveling, for example, like combining. That's called waqtul udhr. Because of an excuse, you're praying asr before the time is in. So that time is called the time of excuse. It's time of excuse.
Can you translate all those times without English?
So for waqtul fadila, I've just coined this term, the prime time, because that's most fitting. And then after that is the choice time, which is like the second best after the prime time. Then there's waqtul jawaz, which means the permissible time without dislikeness. Then there's the permissible time with dislikeness, which is like 20 minutes before Asr ends. And then a part of that 20 minutes is the forbidden time, which is the time that's no longer enough for you to do the minimum of the prayer. And then there's the waqtul udhr, which is dhuhr time. And then there's waqtul darura, which is the time, like for example, that a woman, she finished her period and it's only enough time for her to say Allahu Akbar. Yeah. So you would have to, it's not multiple choice. You would have to write this whole footnote, for example. That's one question on the test. That's how it is. Alhamdulillah. And this, like we said, is a beginner's book. So this is for like 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds. And of course, and for them it would be extra easy because the young mind is like faster and sharper and stronger. Right? And not stronger, but like more able to handle and absorb a lot of information. Once the person starts to age, information or a lot of information overwhelms them. Okay, so the author said the prayer of Asr starts right when the Dhuhr time ends. So there is no time in between the end of Dhuhr time and the beginning of Asr time. Like we said, there's no gap. In the Shafi'i school, there's no gap. The end of its choice time is by the shadow becoming twice as long as the object. The end of its permissible time is sunset. The best time to pray the Asr prayer is at the beginning of its time, just as it is the case with each prayer. It is better to pray it between the beginning of its time and before the length of the shadow becomes double the length of the object, plus the length of the shadow when the sun was at its zenith. This is so because of the hadith of Jibreel that was mentioned, that he led the Prophet ﷺ in the prayer. On the first day, Jibreel led the Prophet ﷺ in the Asr prayer at the beginning of the time. On the second day, he did that for the Asr prayer when the length of the shadow became double the length of the object, in addition to the shadow when the sun was at its zenith. Jibreel did not delay it any further. If one delays the Asr prayer without an excuse more than that until the sun becomes yellow, which is about 30 minutes before the sunset, this is very disliked. So if one did that without any excuse and prayed at that time, there is strong dislikedness in that. One loses the reward, although the prayer is still within its time, and he's not sinful. It was narrated in Sahih Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ likened the prayer of the one who does that to the prayer of the munafiqun, the hypocrites. And those that were outwardly presenting Islam, but internally they hated Islam. Na'udhu billah. What a sick thing, what a sick way. And there were people like that because some people, they like to pretend for the outside world. And they were so audacious to the extent that in front of the Prophet ﷺ, they would pretend that they loved him and that they, for example, they wanted his shawl, they wanted to be buried with it, they want to seek blessings from him. But then when they were behind closed doors and amongst other people that were like them, they would talk bad about the Prophet ﷺ. The remaining times of the Asr prayer are similar to the ones of the Dhuhr prayer. It is sinful to delay it on purpose until there is not enough time to pray all of it within its time. But still, if one prays one rak'ah of it within its time, then it is not considered a make-up prayer. Also, if one has an excuse to join the prayer, one can bring forward the Asr prayer and pray it after praying the Dhuhr within the time of the Dhuhr. Once the Asr time ends, immediately the Maghrib time starts, and there is no time in between them. There is no gap in between them. And we'll stop here for now. If there are no questions, we'll conclude.
This is off topic, but can you quickly go over the story of when the Prophet received revelation about the hypocrites in his masjid and what he did?
Okay, so there was an instance. So basically, the original judgment is that the Prophet ﷺ, he only knows what Allah Ta'ala reveals to him. And other than that, the Prophet ﷺ, he judges according to the rules of Islam. So if someone appears to him as a Muslim and they don't do anything in front of him that makes them judged as exiting from Islam, the Prophet ﷺ judges them as Muslims, even though, let's say, there's another Muslim who witnessed that hypocrite commit blasphemy. So that one who witnessed that hypocrite, he doesn't judge him as a blasphemer. But that hypocrite, he acts like he is the best Muslim in front of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, he treats him as he appears. He says Assalamu alaikum to him. He makes supplication for forgiveness for him. He treats him as a Muslim. So the Prophet ﷺ, if he didn't witness it, he judges by the apparent. In one specific instance, Allah Ta'ala revealed the names of those who were pretending to be Muslim, who outwardly acted like they were Muslim, but internally they hated Islam, or they slandered the Prophet ﷺ, or they mocked and belittled Islam behind closed doors. Allah Ta'ala exposed those people and told the Prophet ﷺ their names. And the Prophet ﷺ, or Allah Ta'ala revealed the names of those hypocrites to the Prophet ﷺ. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he called them out in the masjid, and he said, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, leave the masjid. So-and-so, the son of so-and-so, leave the masjid. So-and-so, the son of so-and-so, leave the masjid. That was the, yeah.
Leave the masjid.
Yes, leave the masjid, yeah. Exactly those words. So-and-so, the son of so-and-so, exits. يخرج. يخرج. Naam, any questions there? طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم. We started on page 123 and we ended at page 129, last paragraph. Going over the Maghrib prayer and the Isha prayer time, inshallah, in the next class. And then after that is what makes prayer obligatory and the recommended matters. And going deeper and deeper into this beginner's book of the Islamic law, learning the Islamic law, it widens your horizons, it expands your mind, it strengthens your mind. نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.